Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my Shield Charge Ignite Elementalist. This is a build I first created in 3.15 and wanted to try in the current meta, as it's an extremely fun meme build for Alch and Go strats. Shield Charge scales incredibly well with Ignite due to its high base damage, and the physical scaling allows us to use the physical damage as extra elements or as extra chaos stats, while using Shaper of Flames, which lets all those damage types then ignite. Being a shield skill also frees up my weapon slot to be a stat stick and gives me even more of those mods on top. We also make use of the Divine Inferno jewel, which gives us a whopping 60% more ignite damage for a single jewel slot. I also use the Fan the Flames medium cluster notable for the ignite proliferation, and having global proliferation means that our explosions proliferate as well, resulting in the chain explosions you see on the screen. Pair that with a fancy Herald of Ash MTX, and you're good to go. Overall, Shield Charge Ignite is kind of flawed right now, since it does get hurt by Arch Nemesis being so incredibly rippy this patch, even on the easiest content available, as the build is rather squishy and it doesn't really allow for things like maximum resistance or spell suppression scaling. However, for what it was, I still had a ton of fun reliving some of the old speed mapping that PoE was known for prior. With that being said, let's get into the build portion of the video. Alright, so before we get into the meat of the video, I wanted to get some quick disclaimers out of the way so that people don't get baited into this build, even though they want to do different content than what this build was made for. Number one, I'll start down here. This build is made for Alch and Go. It's not made for Maven. It's not made for anything. This build is specializing in something. So one of the things that a lot of people think is every single build has to clear all the content, which on softcore is not really true if you want to make currency. What you want to have if you want to make currency is you want to have a build that excels at something, that isn't just like a mesh of random stuff that can do everything, sure, but it excels at nothing. So for example, that's what a League Starter would be, right? Because you want to do everything. But after that, which is my second build here, I wanted to make this for Alch and Go, so we're trying to leverage its speed. So something like Maven or whatever would not leverage that speed. That being said, if you're looking for an all-rounder, look elsewhere. Number two, this build is quite expensive. At the time of this recording, I've paid 140 divines in total for the gear. I can't say how much this will be in the future, but the build is inherently expensive, and you might go to POB and like scratch some numbers and remove some stuff here or there, and you're like, oh, this still seems like okay damage. But the thing really is with Shield Charge, you want to be on the fly, right? You want to charge through enemies, and you can't have just rares not dying. So every inch of damage actually matters in order for everything to die whenever you charge and you explode a pack. So do not underestimate the cost. I would not try this build unless you have at least 100 divines. Number three, the build is quite squishy. And this is why I call this build a meme build, because currently the way this game works is no matter what content you do, Archnems are going to absolutely destroy you. Even the most easiest content ever. Like, I have done this build in 3.15, and back then there was nothing really stopping you. I had half the damage in 3.15, even less survivability, and nothing could ever kill me. I actually leveled to like level 98 or 99 with it. But nowadays, even in the least juicy maps, Archnems can just completely destroy you. So yeah, the build is squishy. I didn't mind overall. My currency most likely didn't mind, but if you're somebody who absolutely hates builds, who's like somebody who, for example, likes to go RF and doesn't want to die, this is not the build for you. All right, so next up, let's talk about Shield Charge, our main skill. Now, you might think about why Shield Charge is main skill. Why can't you just take something else? The reason is basically while mapping, if you just have to press one button, number one, that's really, really nice that everybody who ever played RF knows exactly what I mean. But number two, this skill actually has some really interesting scaling. So I'm going to show you this here right now. So the most important thing about Shield Charge is that it scales off of your offhand, off of your shield, right? So what you want on your shield is as much armor as possible. No other stat matters. Think about this as like your weapon. It would be like, do I want to get a little bit extra res for removing a little bit of damage? No. You want to have as much armor as possible, and everything else comes second. And you can see this here with the line 5 to 7 added physical damage per 15 armor or evasion on the shield. So you get quite a bit of flat damage. Also, we have +2 on our chest, which gets this to level 24, which is where the next breakpoint is, where it gives 6 to 8 added physical damage instead of 5 to 7, which is a huge damage increase. I think it's around about 10% more damage. So that is what you want to reach. You want to reach level 24. So even more than just Cloak of Flame, it's very important that you simply have a +2 chest. Other than that, there's not really much to say about Shield Charge in general. It's not really a complex skill. One thing I want to mention is that Shield Charge has 100% more damage with hits at maximum distance. This doesn't matter. No matter whether you go like this or whether you go this way, it doesn't matter, you deal the same amount of ignite damage. Since you're running Rizlafas though, one thing I want to mention is that simply doing like this and then going away against a single target doesn't really make that much sense because you have very high damage variety. So why Rizlafas is so good for bleed and ignite builds is basically it raises the biggest amount of damage you can deal, but lowers the minimum damage. So it's kind of like evens out. It still comes out to more damage, but for ignite and bleed builds, it doesn't matter. Only the highest hit matters. So that less minimal physical attack damage actually just doesn't matter at all, right? As long as you apply enough ignites so that you can hit a big one, which means that your strat against single target should definitely be applying a few ignites before going away. Next up, let's explain Ascendancy. The explosions in the intro might have caught your eye there. The reason this works is because of a medium cluster notable that we're using, which is called Fan the Flames. So usually what a build like this would often do is it would get ignite proliferation from one of the support gems, right? But in this case, no, because this is proliferation that's global, which means it also counts for your explosions, which then means that the explosions proliferate outwards. Basically, even though stuff is exploding, it's still chaining and proliferating. And this is basically why this build is viable, even though Shield Charge has kind of a small hitbox. Obviously, we're also Elementalist, so the 60% AoE from Heart of Destruction helps a lot as well. Which, once again, this is global AoE, so it also counts for proliferations. Also, thing about Ascendancy is the explosion is physical, which then scales with all your physical as extra damage. I will talk about later how to, for example, craft the Scepter in a later part of the video. Next up, let's talk about Ascendancy. So basically, everything you need to know is that Shaper of Flames is the reason we go Elementalist. There's some nice stuff in here, sure, but Shaper of Flames basically makes us able to stack stuff like, for example, Unholy Might, which gives us 30% of physical as extra chaos damage, and that can ignite. This all gets added to our base ignite damage, which is huge. We can use scepters like this. Usually we can only use physical as extra fire, but this allows us otherwise. One thing I want to mention here is that you still want to try and have fire to be your highest hit, because otherwise you don't get the 25% more damage with ignites, because that only counts if your highest hit would have been fire. And then Mastermind of Discord is basically just a no-brainer, minus 25 resistances, as well as Heart of Destruction, which gives us a little bit of boost to extra single target, but is mostly there for the 60% global AoE. And that's in general extremely huge, because most of the AoE nodes on the tree scale area damage, which we don't want because it doesn't scale our ignite. So that's why Elementalist, really nice. And at the end, if you want to go even squishier, you can go Shaper of Storms, embrace the squishiness, sure. Hits always shock. You get, like, I don't know, a 15% shock. That's cool and all. In the end, I had some armor lying around and I had like nothing in terms of elemental reduction. I couldn't really scale Macress all that well. So, and I didn't have any spell suppression, so I was like, yeah, Bastion of Elements will probably have to give. You also Reflect Immune, which can help as well. All right, so let's give you a little bit of gameplay and show you how this build plays. Number one, on our left click, very important, we have Infernal Cry, which is instant because we have Call to Arms, so it doesn't disturb your charging around, which is really nice. We have Blood Rage, which we press once. It gives us extra frenzy charges. It gives us extra attack speed to get around faster. Shield Charge is basically our main movement skill and also main damage dealer. So what this means in total is you're not pressing all that many buttons. Our Molten Shell is on cost when damage taken. If you really feel like it, you can press your Val Molten Shell. And we also have our Arcanist brand here, which is for single target damage, and it applies Wave of Conviction, Flame Surge, and Combustion. So just a little bit of an extra damage boost. So let's get into the map here and show you how this is done. So we go up here, and now against Essences, you put down your Arcanist brand, you pop it open, this happens, and it dies. You move on. So one of the nice things about Atoll, for example, and what I want to show you with Expedition, is that it can one-pop Expeditions really nicely. So we go up here, we go to the boss, boom, we put down our Arcanist brand, we do this, we stay away from the bosses, they die. And out there we go. So you're basically just charging around, activating Val Haste whenever you can, I guess. I actually missed out on that right here. Let's do this real quick. And yeah, that's basically your playstyle. So this build is just extremely nice for simply being super easy. So something I will show you here is we can actually quickly set up a expedition. I'm just going to do this randomly so this doesn't take too much of your time. But I will show you that we can circle back around, and once everything is exploded, we're basically just going to jump in and annihilate the whole screen with one fell swoop. All right, so I think we did this. Doesn't seem to be bricked. Let's activate it. Now we circle around, and then we are going to come back later, and I'm going to show you how that looks like. So let's go down here. Boom. So this is basically how you can leverage shield charge. All right. Oh, good. I think that was a got touched. All right. Essence, pop, Arcanist brand, boom. Go up. All right, everything's cleared. I'm going to spare you the harvest. Actually, I can show you the harvest real quick if you guys want to. I'm just going to show you one plot real quickly so you can see how this goes. Proliferation builds are extremely good at harvest, extremely good at expedition, so that one is definitely covered. And the squishiness doesn't really matter because everything just gets deleted. As you can see here, even the big boy didn't really have too much to say against that. You go in, everything explodes, boom, 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 and you collect your loot. This is how this build looks like in an Alkengo scenario. That's what it excels at, as I said earlier. All right, but let's talk about gear right now. Number one, the Scepter is really important. So what we have here is a Harvest enchant that gives us a little bit of extra elemental damage. If you want to make it perfect, get it to 30 quality. But what you want to stack as much as possible here is physical damage as extra. And it doesn't matter what that is. Fire, lightning, cold. As I said earlier, Shaper of Flames scales them all equally. I'll show you how to make the Scepter later in the video. It's actually not as hard as it seems like. The only mod here that was kind of lucky was the increased damage per endurance charge. I slammed that one on because exalts are very, very cheap this patch. Now, Cloak of Flame, here's the thing. It doesn't really matter what chest you use. You just want it to have +2 levels. And that is because of what I talked about in the intro with shield charge having a certain breakpoint at level 24 where it gets 10% more damage because of how it scales. Now, one thing that a lot of people are asking me is about Bronze Life. Bronze Life actually isn't that good anymore. Number one, you would be even more squishy. Like Cloak of Flame does take away a lot of the squishiness against physical hits. So number one, that's kind of a no-go. Number two, the extra levels actually don't matter. So just to actually show you what an extra, so you could have a Bronze Life with extra levels. Let's say you get an extra 5 levels, right? So right now we have Ignite DPS 5.6 million. See how this goes up with 5 levels. It's not much. It's like barely noticeable, and that is because they changed how shield charge works. So if you're coming here from the 3.15 video, that's the number one thing you have to know. Now, if you somehow get this to level 34, there's another stage where it's really, really strong. Overall, all you have to know is that in total, you want to get this to level 24, and that is achieved by having Awakened added Fire, at least at level 5, which gives you +1 to level of physical skill gems, and then you get +2 from your chest armor. Other things this could be is, for example, Lightning Coil or Brass Dome would be good options. And if you want to go really, really budget, which, like I said, I would not recommend, you can go Bronze Life, but you're going to be absolute paper. Palsteron from the future here. I forgot to mention how to color Cloak of Flame, because that is a question I get all the time. You're going to be using Tainted Chromatic Orbs. They're huge. It's incredibly easy. Don't do anything else. That is the way. As for shield, all that matters is that you have as much armor as possible. So I made the synthesis base myself. It didn't exist. So if you want to get tier 1 increased armor, like you see here, you have to have at least item level 86. That's basically the deal with this. We have the increased armor synthesized on it. It's only tier 3 increased armor, but it is what it is. We hit this one quite luckily. So obviously the GG would be triple tier 1. One thing I want to say is that you can definitely use Exalted pretty easily because they only cost like 12 chaos or 13 chaos at this recording. So definitely try to hit that armor whenever you do that. But the way you craft this is with dense fossils. There's no other strat behind this. Also, we are ailment immune. With this stat here, we also get 35% chance to avoid and 32 in the implicit. So that is basically how we accomplish that. If you don't have it on your shield, what you can do as well is use one of your grand spectrums for the ailment avoidance, and you have the same outcome. Then we have Ascendancy, which is basically what makes this build tick, what gets us the explosions, once again, with Fan the Flames up here. What you want is you want LE weakness on hit. If you can get a second implicits, that's nice to have, but that's really important. I guess the life roll is also nice to have. Then we have boots. Now, I personally made it so I could fracture the one abyssal socket. That was back when the life force prices were a little bit lower, so I don't know if it's worth it right now. But basically what you can do if you do that is you can get a jewel that gives you phasing on kill. You can obviously also get it on flasks, but since I'm going for rarity stacking, that wasn't really an option. Other than that, if you can get these implicits, you'll be ailment immune. Either you get the rest from this, like I said, or with the Grand Spectrum. Also, one thing some people might ask in terms of boots is why I'm not using a Legacy of the Fury. Wouldn't it be nice to have even more explode? The answer is no, and it's not because I hate fun, it's simply because this actually breaks your explosion chains. So I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly what's going on here, but basically what I think is happening is this explosion here is not actually a hit. So it does not proliferate your curses onto an enemy and therefore blocks your explosion chains. If something dies to this dot right here, because it is a damage over time, it's not a hit, right? The explosion is a damage over time. So I think that's what's happening. But yeah, I tried these boots. It would have been really nice also for this extra scorch effect, the extra damage. But overall, it just didn't work out, so I had to cut it. Now, when it comes to the helmet, helmet chant, in my opinion, the best one is Infernal Cry, cooldown recovery rate, and that's simply because Infernal Cry is up more. You will be charging quite a bit, and only having 6 exerts means that it gets used up real quick, and you want it to be up faster, so I think that is personally my favorite by far. As for jewelry, I personally went for rarity jewelry, and this obviously makes the build weaker. You can definitely go for some damage over time multiplier. Elemental damage with attack skills also works for Ignite, so you can get a lot more damage out of that. You can get some more defenses out of that, but that's what I personally opted for. As for Ami, the number one Ami is Onslaught Vow, and that's simply because Ignite has so many good support gems. As you can see here, the +1 level of fire gems doesn't do anything for us, but it's about the 39% more burning damage. It's really, really hard to compete with this, and if on top you also have a good roll like I have here, you're also going to fix your resistances quite a bit. That being said, you can also go for damage over time multiplier, elemental damage with attacks, and life roll. You're going to lose around about 20-15% of your damage, but the extra life roll could also help out quite a bit. As Anoint, we're using Dirty Techniques, which is simply incredible. It's down here, straight up just more damage. Then I have Rizlafas, which is basically incredible for Ignite or Bleed builds. I already explained why in the opener. Now, if you have a Headhunter, obviously go for Headhunter. That should go without saying. Also, you get quite a bit of physical as extra element with Headhunter, which does scale the Ignite damage. Once again, making Shield Charge a very good candidate for a Headhunter build. As for flasks, we have a Life Flask here, which is pretty sloppily crafted. It doesn't really matter. I didn't really feel like I need instant life recovery ever. I more want to have a Life Flask against Degens, because Degens are just absurd ever since Archnem came out. A little bit of help against Degens is also the less damage taken over time from the damage over time mastery. We then obviously use a Quicksilver Flask. Now, I personally use a Rarity Flask. That's because I'm farming for currency right now. If you just want to be a little bit tankier, go for a Granite Flask of the Armadillo. Then we have Sin's Rebirth, which is a lot of more damage straight up. Now, what you can also do is if you have an Obliteration, you can get a Corruption that has Unholy Might on kill, and then you don't need Sin's Rebirth at all. Then again, I wouldn't really recommend that. As I said, I wouldn't recommend this as a budget build in general. Taste of Hate, just super strong, gives us extra damage as cold, which helps our Ignite, and it also makes us take less physical damage. As for the helmet, what you're looking for mainly is the right Eldritch Implicits, and that is mana reservation efficiency and reduced mana cost of attacks. If you're struggling with mana, you can always go Life Tap if you really wanna, but since we don't really have any regen, that actually felt quite bad. So what you can do here is you can go, I think, up to 30%. This is a pretty low roll, but it worked out for us. And you can also have mana reservation efficiency, which will make it so you can use Herald of Purity on top of Herald of Ash for some extra damage. And when it comes to stats, well, I'm going for rarity stacking right now. I've run about 360 rarity, as you might have seen. I have an okay life roll. I have some resistances. I like this helmet. You want the physical taken as fire damage if you can get on top. Otherwise, I don't know, you can just go for more resistances, more life, more armor. You can also go for an influenced helmet if you really want to, with nearby enemies take increased LE damage and nearby enemies have minus fire res, but overall then you lose your Eldritch Implicits, which I think is never worth it. As for jewels, all of them are unique. Number one, we have Divine Inferno, and this one gives us straight up 60% more damage when an attack gets exerted by Infernal Cry. So that's just huge for the build. It's straight up 60% more damage for Jewel Slot, right? What you have to know here, what I get asked every single time, is why I put it in here, because I only have 30 strength allocated. The thing is, for Threshold Jewels, you don't have to have them allocated. You just have to have them nearby. This is basically made so you can't just throw it somewhere on the deck side. And once again, this is also why I really like having the Infernal Cry cooldown recovery, because it means that these 60% more damage is up more. Number 2, I have a Lethal Pride. All this Lethal Pride does is give me 20% faster ignite and a little bit of strength, which is actually quite pathetic, I will say. I had a version before where I kind of went like here, I went in the Templar region, and it did a lot more, but it turned out to be actually worse, because then I couldn't grab Tireless, I couldn't make my mana cost smaller, and I had mana problems, right? So that's overall why I went with it here. It's not really that much better than a rare jewel. It's just something I had lying around. Then we have my Watcher's Eye, which kind of fixes my mana. So as it says here, I have 40% chance to recover 10% of mana when you use a skill while affected by clarity, which I have on just for that purpose. This basically completely fixes my mana. As I can say, you can also go life tap or some other shenanigans. Maybe get more reduced mana cost of attacks on here. Other than that, I have just faster ignites. It doesn't matter whether you get faster ignites, damage over time multiplier, well malevolence, maybe even both if you can afford it. They're really expensive right now. Yeah, those are really, really strong. Then let's talk about Grand Spectrums. So Grand Spectrums this patch are incredible, and that's mainly because of, for example, this one here, which gives you +1 min endurance charge per Grand Spectrum. Now, these are basically just like 3 jewels. You can only have 3 maximum Grand Spectrums, and they just give you 3 times the effect that they say there, because it's per Grand Spectrum. So for example, this one gives you 3 minimum endurance charges, and minimum endurance charges are just really, really strong for a few reasons. So the thing with endurance charges is if you get them on kill, for example, with Aggressive Bastion, you cannot really rely on them for the resistances, and you can't really rely on them against bosses. Having them minimum and always up means not only do you get the physical damage reduction always, no matter what, you also get the 12 auras, and you can count on them. You can actually basically take away res elsewhere. Because think about balancing around on kill and then just, I don't know, not having them up, and you go from like 75 res to, I don't know, like 65. It's just completely nonsense, right? So that's why minimum endurance charges are just completely incredible. This one's really expensive right now. Now, this one here, Grand Spectrum, gives you a little bit extra elemental damage. As I said earlier, if you don't have the avoid ailments, you get it here from a Grand Spectrum. There's, I think, a Viridian Grand Spectrum that does that. And I also went for the life one because I felt squishy enough, so I thought, let's just throw that in there as well. Now, the Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh are always things that could get price fixed or something. These are not that important for this build, thank God. But basically, you get an extra curse, which is nice. You get a little bit of extra effect. Enemies cursed have malediction, which makes them take 10% more damage, yada, yada, yada. One thing you have to know is you can actually apply elemental weakness even if you don't have an additional curse, because the temporal chains is like the elemental weakness actually activates before temporal chains because it's alphabetical. So it doesn't matter for that. It is still nice to have temporal chains on enemies because it means the ignite duration lasts longer. Now, next up, let's talk about gems. Your main skill, Shield Charge, is in your body armor because the body armor will supposedly have the +2 in order to get it to level 24. This is achieved with a level 21 shield charge, +2 from the body armor, and then +1 from awakened added fire damage at 24. Once again, there's the damage breakpoint. Awakened ally damage with attacks is nice. If you have this, it also kind of makes this one redundant, right? The cannot take reflected elemental damage. Once again, I more took this because I was very, very weak against ally damage overall. So you have this awakened added fire damage. You have awakened deadly ailments, which is incredibly strong. Divergent Inspiration. If you cannot figure out your mana without this, with this, you can always go for life tap, but then you probably have to get some regen somewhere, otherwise it's going to feel terrible. And then also Awakened Swift Affliction. One of the reasons we get away with the 25 less duration of supported skills is because we're using Cloak of Flame and it gives us so much ignite duration. Then we have our single target setup, which I basically put this down whenever there's an essence or there's like an expedition, whatever I'm waiting for anyway. Put down the Arcanist brand and you get a lot of damage. So the Arcanist brand casts Flame Surge, which is straight up 25% more damage against single targets. Wave of Conviction, which applies Exposure, which also applies the Mastermind of Discord effect. As well as that, you have Combustion, which gives another -10 fire res. So this is just an absolute single target powerhouse. We have the usual cast on damage, take a Molten Shell. If you're somebody who usually loves to have their Molten Shell on left click, this is not really the build for it, because we will have to use Infernal Crown left click. It's just too nice to always have up. Disregard the Phantasmal completely. I also removed it from the POB. It's an oversight. It doesn't do anything. And I have it with Life Tap just so the mana cost doesn't really do much, because it is not reduced by all the reduced mana cost of, for example, the helmet. As well as that, I have my auras. So I have two setups with a level 3 Enlighten and a level 4 Enlighten. So the level 4 Enlighten has all the big boy auras. So it's Determination, which is 50%, Malevolence, and Herald of Ash. Herald of Ash is really nice as extra damage. It also makes your explosions look a lot fancier. Malevolence, it is not the greatest, it's not crazy, but it also gives you a ton of good Watcher's Eye stats at your disposal, right? If you want to replace this for something like Grace, you can, but it will be pretty annoying, especially also the dexterity requirements. And overall, making this build more tanky will mean that you will have less damage, and therefore it won't feel as good overall. But Determination is too much of a no-brainer not to use, especially while already scaling so much armor from your shield. And then we also have Herald of Purity, which we have with a level 3 Enlighten, and we have the Clarity, which is simply there because of the Watcher's Eye mod that we have that kind of fixes our mana. So the thing about the Enlightened setups is if you have better things to do with your sockets, you can do that. The only thing these do basically is allow us to get Herald of Purity on top of everything else, which is an extra 30% more damage, which I thought was worth it, but it's not the end of the world if you can't fit it in. At the end, we also have some one gem that you can put somewhere. I have Val Haste. The only reason Val Haste and Blood Rage are not leveled up more is because I don't have more dexterity. If you can somehow figure that out, obviously you want to level them to 20. This just gives us more attack speed, gives us more movement speed. It's just like a no-brainer. And then we also have Blood Rage, which gives us frenzy charges, gives us more attack speed, as well as that Val Molten Shell, I forgot. Basically, you press this whenever you're in like a really harsh situation. Next up, let's talk about the passive tree. So the passive tree revolves around getting to 3 different large cluster jewels, and they're basically incredibly important. Number one thing you might see here is that we don't use LE Overload, and instead we use Resolute Technique. And there is a reason for that. It is because Elemental Overload is now not as easy to activate anymore. We don't have much crit. So on the one hand, it's actually not that easy to trigger. Its uptime is not going to be as much. And POB will actually give you a wrong impression of how good this node actually is. This is more of a POB warrior thing for a lot of builds. Unless you're an Ignite build that actually hits quite a bit, yeah, this can be fake DPS a lot of the time. On the other hand, our gear is kind of restrained, so it's hard to get that much accuracy. Since we're on the left side of the tree and we don't have much dexterity at all and no accuracy at all, it would be incredibly hard to get to 100%. We would have to use precision, which would mean we have to cut damage auras. It would mean we have to occupy suffixes. Like we're on, I think, 46% chance to hit without Resolute Technique. We're so far away to get to 100. And also it's really nice against evasive monsters on top, right? So if you cut all the things you would have to cut to go for LE Overload, you would probably be worse off than even if this was up 100% of the time. So yeah, that's that, because I get that question a lot. Damage over time mastery, go for the 10% less damage taken from damage over time. I can't believe the balance around Archnem right now. The damage over time is insane. This is a no-brainer for every build that can take it. Then we have our large clusters. Let's talk about it real quick. So we have these right here. What we want on these clusters is 35% increased effect and 3% increased attack and cast speed with physical skills. The reason I went for these over some of the normal jewels that I used in the past with like Sadist, Prismatic Heart, the elemental types, is because these can give you so much attack speed. Between the 3 of these give me 120% attack speed, making the build the speedy monster it is that you saw in the intro and in the playstyle section, right? On top of that, the increased physical damage actually scales your Ignite, and that is because if the Ignite comes from physical damage, it also gets scaled by the increased physical damage. That's basically how it works, just plainly spoken. And on top of that, you can do stuff like fix your dexterity, which I did here. I get like 90 dexterity just from this one right here. You can get some extra life, which I did here. I have a little bit of life, a little bit of extra strength. Or you can fix your Chaos Res, which I did down here. And I want to emphasize this again. The most important thing about these is it has to be 3% attack and cast speed. It has to be 35% increased effect. PoE does not do decimals. If you have 2% here, the 35% increased effect does nothing for it. You don't get to 4%. Vice versa, if you have only 25% effect, but 3%, it doesn't get the 3 to 4 as well. So it is just basically a necessity, which means you need eye level 84 jewels. And I will talk about this later in the crafting section as well. Now, overall, this is why we're going such a long way. Along the way, we grab some of the most efficient nodes. For example, Holy Fire. We want the mastery with the damage over time multiplier. One really cool thing about Cloak of Flame as well is that you can always use the fire res because you start off with minus 30 fire res from the fire mastery as well. Just a little bit of a side thing here. We always say take the 50 life here, Purity Flesh. We need the mana reservation, of course. Here's where we have the Divine Inferno. Now, other than that, what you want is this here. Recover 2% life when you ignite a non-ignited enemy. In a build like this that doesn't really have sustain, that is an absolute godsend. So you go for Magmatic Strikes, you go for Arsonist. Tireless is really, really useful. That's why I pathed here to get the reduced cost of skills. That on top of the helmet, that on top of a Divergent Inspiration will kind of fix your mana. And once again, if it doesn't, just go for Life Tap instead. The reason I say that is because this build is a little bit finicky and I can't explain every single detail about how you could fix your mana. It is impossible. You will kind of have to play around with it. You can also get minus mana cost on your ring, or maybe if you have a rare amulet, right? Other than that, we're going for the armor mastery. One huge thing here is that I actually had to go for the determination has increased mana reservation efficiency if you can fix your mana reservation efficiency elsewhere. For example, if this was not 9% reservation efficiency but 12, which is very expensive, you could replace this with the increased armor from equipped shield, which our shield has a crazy amount of armor, so that would be huge. That would give us like an extra 4 to 5k, which would also make our Molten Shell better, obviously. Call to Arms, incredible, makes your Infernal Cry basically instant. But yeah, something else I get asked a lot is, can I cut this large cluster jewel down here and just go in here, go for Born to Fight, right? Go through the life, get the maximum resistance, get the stun immune, get the jewel here. You can, but you would make this build into something that it simply isn't. Will it make you extra tanky? Yes, it will, but it also will make you slower. You're missing on 40% attack speed. You're missing a lot of damage. Also, you cannot run Grand Spectrums at all because your 2 jewel sockets are missing here. It's quite important to have this. So what I will say is that if you think that just Prismatic Skin and Stun Immune is gonna fix the whole Arch Nemesis debacle, where even in Alkan Go maps, enemies are super rippy, no, it won't, right? You can try it, but it will not help as much as you might think it does. All right, so next up, let's talk about the Scepter. So the way you start off the Scepter is you want an at least item level 85 Void Scepter, no wand or anything, because spell damage does not scale your ignite. It has to be elemental damage. You then want to Awaken Orb together a Redeemer Void Scepter and a Shaper Void Scepter. And you want to merge together the extra physical damage as extra fire damage and the physical damage as extra cold damage. The way you can spam those on their bases is basically you can use physical fossils until you hit it. One important thing I want to say here is that I actually screwed up the craft and wasted a lot of currency because I went Warlords instead. That was because of an oversight. We're going to talk about why when we talk about the suffixes, but don't ever go Warlords. So basically you slam together the 2 scepters and you're going to now have both mods, and there is going to be a random amount of other mods. Let's just craft this on here to real quickly block this. Let's say you have an item like this. Let's remove this here. This would be a really, really good item because you now have your 2 prefixes, but you also have an open prefix and an open suffix. That is what you're looking for. If you don't have that, then you will either have to try again or just annul orb and hope that you can annul off the 3rd prefix. However, if you got really, really lucky and you got like a high elemental damage with attacks or a high fire damage roll, you're basically done. Your prefixes are done. But the way to fill the 3rd prefix with something useful is with Reforged Chaos. So what we're looking for right here is this mod. Gain percentage of elemental damage as extra chaos damage. This is straight up a more multiplier for the build, so it is absolutely incredible. So what you want to do is you basically first want to do prefixes cannot be changed and then Reforged Chaos. So that would look something like this. Prefixes cannot be changed. Boom. This costs you 2 divine, so it is quite expensive. Once again, build is not really all that budget viable. And then you go Harvest, we go Chaos, and then Reforge Chaos right here. So what you need to know is there is a chance that you're going to roll Chaos Resistance instead. It is quite low though. If you look at the weightings right here, there's 2,000 weighting on the damage as extra Chaos damage. There's a little bit of weighting on the added Chaos damage, so that could happen, but it's only 400. And then there's, I think, 750 on the Chaos Res right here. So unless you get unlucky, you're going to hit either of these stats. I actually settled for T2 on my own weapon, but if you want to go for T1, obviously that's also an option. Just depends on how much you want to invest. So we do Reforge Chaos. Boom. In this case, we got Chaos Resistance, but the prefix did not get filled, so we can simply try again. Prefix cannot be changed. Try again. Boom. This time we hit Chaos damage. So now you would have to annul, right? So let's see if we can annul. Maybe we hit it. Maybe we don't. We did not, right? So what happens now is you would have to recraft the Scepter, which doesn't cost you that much. Right now, Awakening Orbs are not very expensive compared to most leagues, at least. So we lost the 66% 2 times in a row. Let's see if it happens this time. Prefix cannot be changed. We're at the same state we were before. Boom, put it on, and we do the Reforge Chaos again. And this time we hit it. In this case, we hit T2, so you basically now have the same prefixes as I have. As for the suffixes, the most important thing is that you have a craft open for the fire damage over time multiplier, and you get the physical damage as extra damage of a random element. The third mod is kind of random because you're going to slam it on. So let's quickly see how this would go. So on this base right here, what you would do is you would craft, once again, prefix cannot be changed. And this time what you do is you reforge physical. And now this is the reason why I completely screwed up. I buried 8 Divine Orbs for no reason. I'll show you why. On a Shaper Redeemer Scepter, the only physical mod is this one here. This is how I used to craft it in 3.15, exactly like this. So you can reforge physical, and you always get this mod every single time. It's just between which tier you get. But I had Warlords on, and Warlord gives you another physical mod, the increased physical damage, which is completely useless, and has 1,500 weighting. So while it wasn't that big of a chance, it completely screwed up my crafting, so that's why you don't want a Warlord base. So if we put that into action, we have the Reforge Physical right here. We have prefixes cannot be changed. We do this, boom. In this case, we got tier 2, which is exactly the Scepter I have, so we exactly have the Scepter here. Now, other than that, now you can block something. I would block probably something like Intelligence, because as bad as it is, even a resistance here can be useful, right? It can mean that you get resistance cap without having to get it somewhere else, so that's cool. And Exalted Orbs are really cheap, so we just blocked Intelligence, we slam, we got fire damage over time multiplier. Now that is actually a huge hit. In this case, the world is basically your oyster, and you can craft whatever you want here, but let's just be a little bit more realistic, and let's slam it right away. So in this case, we got lightning damage, which you can't really use, which, I don't know, you lose like 4% damage versus the Scepter that I have. At this point, I would basically just call it a day, craft on fire damage over time multiplier, and voila, there's your Scepter. And one note at the end, if you want the perfect Scepter, I only have T2 LE damage as extra chaos, and I only have T2 physical as extra damage over random element. All that happens is you need more divines on average. It is still very, very predictable what's going to happen with this craft, and it's not as bad as it looks like. And when it comes to cluster jewels, you want a large cluster jewel with 12 passives and at least eye level 84. And the reason we need eye level 84 is because both of these mods, which are mandatory, once again, there's no 25%, there's no 2% or 1%. It has to be 35 and 3%. These can only roll at eye level 84. And the way you get these on a magic jewel is simply alteration spam with augments. You can also help yourself with annuls. On average, it's not worth using, but it's going to decrease the time it takes. This is less about how expensive it is, because 3k alterations at the end of the day is not that much for an endgame jewel of this like scale, but the thing is, it takes a long time. We did this on stream. It took us like 2 hours to craft all 3 of these. If you think about fracturing 35% increased effect, I mean, you can do it, but it's not really worth. That's a lot of cost right now with how Life Force is going currently. Now, what you want to do next is you want to beast imprint it. After you beast imprinted it, you basically get this imprint of powerful large cluster jewel of the earthquake. That's how this jewel is called in its magic form. And now you can basically just regal until you hit something good. Now, one thing that makes this crafting a lot easier is that Exalted Orbs are a lot cheaper. Usually you would have to buy a Leo, which is really rough. You also have to trust the other person. Now you can just simply Exalt Slam for the last mod. So what you would do here is you would simply Regal Orb until you get anything decent. For example, like here, 8 strength, not really that good. So all you would do is you would imprint it back. One of the things I want to talk about here is you could theoretically Beastcraft and do prefix to suffix or suffix to prefix and try to save the craft. The problem with that is that the eye level of the beast actually matters, and you don't really get an 84 beast. So what that means is you could not roll any T1 mods on this jewel if you did that. Personally, if you want to roll a good jewel, just imprint it back to its magic form. So what that would look like is you would just get it back to this and you would reroll again until you get something good. Undo, regal, undo, regal. Until you hit anything. For example, here we had 3% elemental resistance, and that is incredible because it also scales with the 35% increased effect. The 3 goes to 4%. The main things you're looking for is Chaos Res. Dexterity is the biggest one probably. Any sort of life resistances, right, can fix a lot of things for you. And what I would do at this point is just slam. Now, in this case, we hit 2% increased damage, which is not crazy, but I would definitely keep this jewel. As you can see, my jewels are like very far from perfect. I could have 10% maximum life here instead of mana, and I would get a total of extra 100 life, which would be scaled and would probably be at like 4.7k life. This one here is not that great, and this one up here is not that crazy either. But at the end here, what is my conclusion about the build? Number one, this build is incredibly fun. And that is a word I don't want to use lightly here because currently the way the game has been shaped ever since 3.15 is it gets harder and harder and harder. You have to use like 2-button builds. A lot of the fun builds just aren't really viable anymore. Skill diversity is an all-time low. So in order to make something like memey or fun, you will have to put a lot of currency in. So once again, this is a very expensive build, but it is just so much fun. That being said, once again, if you're looking for an all-rounder, look elsewhere. Number two, this build is really squishy and you always need to be on the move. If you like builds like this and you want them to be tankier, go for RF. RF is totally fine. It's not as fast as this, but RF can do more things in the game. It's more of an all-rounder. So definitely check out Pox's build guide if you want to do that. So you always need to be on the move. When it comes to this version here, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is that you don't shield charge at some point. You just stand there. As a lot of you guys will have seen this patch, there is a lot of things that are going to jump on you and immediately kill you. So don't do that. And also at the end here, like I said, it's not an all-rounder. It's really, really strong at all can go. If you cannot leverage the speed of shield charge and it being basically a movement skill that also deals damage, why play it in the first place? If you think about doing bossing, you don't really need a non-clunky build. Your build can be clunky because you're just standing there waiting for the next phase. You can't really leverage the strength of this build. So overall, if you're looking for a fun build, you have a lot of currency to just play with, right? Have a lot of fun. It's not that big of a deal that you maybe can't do some of the content in the game, and you just want old school explosions. This will be your build. Overall, whether you want to play the build, you can't play the build because of budget. I hope you learned a thing or two maybe along the way, and see you next time. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do videos like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. But yeah, overall, this build is an absolute blast to play if you can get it to work. It's kind of like a fine-tuned machine. We have farmed so many logbooks, so much currency with this. Once we're selling, we're probably going to come out to like 400 to 500 divines, which is going to get us into our next build, which is going to be a juicy one. But overall, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.